Welcome. I just said I hope we've all had lunch because by the time we hear Tim talk, we will probably be starving. I'm Marianne Cates, and I work with Carter Conversations, which many of you know is a group of villages along Route 1. Hyattsville Aging in Place, Helping Hands of University Park, Neighbors Helping Neighbors, and Explorations on Aging in College Park. We thank the City of Hyattsville for a grant to make some of this possible. So we'd be interested in your comments about what you might like to hear, because I think we will continue doing this. Today, we're just delighted to have Tim Carman with us. Tim is a local resident, actually, lives in Hyattsville, and as many of you know, writes for the Washington Post, a James Beard award-winning food writer, and his work has appeared in numerous editions of the Best Food Writing collection. He's also written for I can't even read my writing, Imbibe Magazine, American Scholar, Food Network Magazine, and other publications. That must be in your spare time, Tim. Before joining the Post in 2010, he served as food editor and columnist for the Washington City paper, and he lives in Hyattsville with his wife, who's the writer M. Carrie Allen, and their two dogs, Lucinda and Hans Footer. I love the names. So, Tom, just in terms of housekeeping, I think if you all don't mind saving your questions or putting them in the chat, or the raise hand function on Zoom. But if there is something you need clarification on as Tim is speaking, please let us know that and we will clarify, and then we will answer the questions towards the end. So with that, Tim, we'll let you make us hungry.
Thanks, Marianne. It's a real pleasure to do this. Thank you for asking me. So I'm going to do what my least favorite thing to do, which is talk about myself for a little bit. And I think the main question I get from most people when I tell them what I do for a living is, gee, how did you get that job? And, it's a long story. And I usually don't like to tell the whole story because refer back to not enjoying talking about myself, but I'll give you most of the story and leave out the ugly details. I've been a journalist a long time. That's what I was trained to do. I went to school for journalism, and my first job was in Kansas City as a news reporter, and then at the Kansas City Star, and then I moved to Houston, which was a real culture shock, and lived down there for like 15 years, and originally hated it, but then grew to love the city in a way that I think only Houstonians really do, and the rest of the country does not. But I was working at the Houston Post for a long time, and I don't know if any of you know about the Houston Post, but in 1995, it just abruptly closed. I mean, we all walked in and we all were told that the newspaper was closed. And so within an hour, we were out on the street with no job. And, that was a tough time. That, it immediately put like 400 journalists on the market. And I at that point, I went into crisis mode, I guess you could call it. And just took a job that I had to. I went into, I worked at an opera house for a little while, working on their magazine. And, but eventually I got back into the newspaper world, or not even really newspaper world. I don't know if you remember in the late 90s, Microsoft, they decided to not just make software for a living. They were going to get into the content production business. And they rolled out these city guides called Sidewalk. And they hired a bunch of journalists to do the work. And so, and it was great for journalists because, you know, we've historically been very low paid, and suddenly Microsoft and Bill Gates comes along and says, hey, we'd like to hire you and we're going to give you all this money. And we're like, hey, we've made it. Well, Microsoft didn't figure that no one wanted to advertise on the internet in 1998. I mean, just believe it or not, people did not think it was going to last. And so it failed. It failed pretty quickly. And so again, I was out of a job. And at that point, this is where my move into food gradually happened. Because I was hired as the managing editor at that point of a weekly newspaper called the Houston Press. And part of my responsibility was to edit the food section. And in the hiring process, the editors over there, they were like, what do you know about food? And I'm like, I eat it. And that wasn't the answer they were looking for, as you can imagine. But they gave me the job anyway, despite that really crummy answer. And they told me, this is your weak spot. You really need to work on it. And one of the first things I had to do was hire a full-time food critic for that newspaper. And we went on a large search, and we found this wonderful writer. He's a James Beard winner. His name is Rob Walsh. And I don't know how many of you know Rob, familiar with him. He's sort of known as a Texas food writer. And we hired him. And I was his immediate editor, so I worked with him on all his columns and cover stories. And it was this eye-opening experience for me, because I always thought of food writing as just being a critic. Like, you had to just go into a restaurant, try to be anonymous, you know, study the interiors, the food on the plate, what the service is like, and write your review, and boom, you were done. Well, Rob was not that kind of food writer. He was both a historian and a critic and a reporter. And he put it all into these really long narrative tales that were just so compelling to read and to write. And, you know, quickly we became friends, not just colleagues. And we would go out to eat all the time. And, you know, I learned a lot from him. And, you know, maybe I taught him a thing or two about how to be a better journalist, because that was not his training. But, you know, in 2001, I was married at the time. And my wife decided that she wanted to go to Washington, D.C. and study, wanted to get a graduate degree. And I was like, why do you want to go to Washington, D.C.? And she said, well, American University has the best public policy school around, and that's where I want to go. I'm like, okay, well, I love my job here. What are we going to do? And so I made that fateful decision to follow her up there. And as you might indicate, the marriage didn't work out. She hated DC. I loved it. I stayed. She left. So I was stuck here in DC by myself. And I didn't have a journalism job. You know, I came up here without a job, which is the worst thing you can do in any market, particularly in DC, which is a very rich journalism market and very competitive. And I didn't think I would ever get back into it. I didn't think that the DC journalism market respected those from Texas or, you know, in Houston. So I took a job in a nonprofit editing their website, and I was freelancing. And at that point, I decided I wanted to go to culinary school. And I went to l'Académie de Cuisine, which is now gone, unfortunately. It was based in Bethesda, but it had its like cooking school up in Gaithersburg. And that's where the nonprofit was located that I was working for at the time. So it was very convenient. And I sort of loved cooking school, and I sort of hated cooking school. And I had no idea what I was going to do with it, but I got a certificate in it and left it. And like I would say 3 months after I got my certificate from the cooking school, there was a job opening at Washington City paper for a food critic. And I was like, oh, you know, this is perfect alignment. You know, I'm a journalist. They want someone with journalism background. They want someone with some cooking knowledge, and I've got a little bit of both. Well, I'm more of one than the other, but they took a chance on me. And in 2005, I started my formal career as a food writer and food critic. I stayed at City Paper for 5 years, and that was sort of a rocky up and down thing. We had to go through the 2008 economic recession, which was terrible for newspapers. And I was briefly laid off because of that. That was like the third time I had lost a job in the journalism world. But I stayed on as a freelancer for them, and they realized, apparently they realized they couldn't live without me, and they hired me back, and I came back full-time again at City Paper and did that for another 2 years. And that was at the time when blogs were huge. You know, the blog world was supposed to be the saving grace of journalism. So we were publishing I had a quota, actually. I had to produce 6 blog items every day. And if you can imagine what that takes, as soon as I would get up, I would go immediately to my computer and try to regurgitate what I had eaten last night or talked to last night, or what I dreamed of during the middle of the night. And then I would start reporting throughout the day, and I had to put up 6 items a day, and then I would have to go out to eat in the evening and do it all over again. It was exhausting, and I knew I couldn't do it for very long, and I did it for about 3 years total. And fortunately, Joe Yonan, my editor now at the Houston Post, rescued me and hired me to be a writer at the Houston Post. And that was in 2010, and about 2 years into it, he and another editor decided that they wanted to have me write a column on sort of under the radar restaurants, these places that are out in the suburbs or not appreciated, kind of mom and pop restaurants, or restaurants owned by immigrant families, recent immigrants or first generation families. And that became a real love for me, a real passion. And I've been doing it almost 10 years. It started out as the $20 diner, but maybe 5 years into it, I realized that name was problematic because it sort of handicapped the people that I was writing about. In the public's mind, it made them think that all this food should always be cheap, and that wasn't right and fair. And so I wrote a column about why I was getting rid of the name, and that really resonated with both readership and the people I cover, and we got rid of it. It was no longer the $20 diner, no longer put that price ceiling, so to speak, on these restaurants, and we just called it casual dining. And this food writing job has given me many pleasures. It's taken me many places in the world. I've been to Copenhagen, to Noma, Rene Redzepi's restaurant in Copenhagen, and I've been to some Michelin star restaurants in Lima, Peru. I've been to Mexico City, and I've been to some of the finest restaurants in all around the DC area, including one whose owners are with us today, Texas 250 Texas Barbecue. And it's been a real pleasure. So that's it in not so much of a nutshell, but I would love just to open it up. I've talked for 15 minutes or so and would love to just entertain your questions and what you would like to know about the job.
Carter, we can use the raised hand function if you like, or the chat, whatever you would like. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Tim, I would kick it off with, how do you choose the restaurants? Is it your choice? And then how do you choose the restaurants that you want to review?
The Post gives me a lot of autonomy. I choose all the restaurants that I write about. And it's not a scientific process. It takes a lot of eating around. It takes some research. There's a lot of misses. And because my column is not like my colleague Tom Sietsema writes about the high profile restaurants and, the ones that have well-known established chefs behind them. And so he will write reviews that are, he's not doing star reviews now during the pandemic, but they can be, no stars to 4 stars. So there's a qualitative aspect to them. And the reviews I write on more or less are generally positive. It's rare for me to go to a small restaurant and go and write bad things about it. That just doesn't make any sense. So it's incumbent upon me to find good restaurants. And I try to, I'm based in Hyattsville. My wife and I live here, but I go all around. And, it's important to our readership that I don't concentrate on one area. I go into Northern Virginia, I go into Southern Maryland, I go into DC proper. I will go wherever I find good restaurants. And it's a real, sometimes readers give me tips. Sometimes those tips are really amazing tips and sometimes they're not so good. But I usually pursue them. Sometimes I randomly find something like, I'm always looking on Yelp pages and I'm not looking at star ratings on Yelp pages, but I'm looking like if I say I want to look for a restaurant in a certain area, I will go do a narrowed search on Yelp and just start going through all the restaurants on that. And I'm just looking for interesting places, places that are serving dishes that maybe I haven't seen very often, or a menu that looks really fascinating. Like I was looking through the restaurants in Damascus, Maryland, and I came upon this place called Tasty 68, which, if you know anything about the naming conventions of Chinese restaurants, you would know it's a Chinese restaurant. But then I started looking through its photos on Yelp, and there was one that talked about the chef, being that he worked at this grand restaurant in Sichuan, and he studied under a Sichuan master. And I'm like, whoa, what is this? And it's like finding this diamond, suddenly. And so I just started going up there. It's a long drive from Hyattsville to Damascus, but I started just going up there and tasting his food. And, he definitely had the touch of a Szechuan, traditional Szechuan chef. And so that's, I wrote about that place. But that is just completely random how I find them. It can be any number of ways, but mostly I try to do a lot of research before I go out to a restaurant, because there's nothing more wasteful to me than driving a long way and knowing that I'm going to, and then having a disappointing experience that I'll never write about. It's a waste of my time. It's a waste of the Post resources. So I try to avoid that and do as much research as I can before I go out.
Well, it's terrific too, because it would seem to me, and our 250 guests could validate this, that you do find places that would take them a long time to get established. I mean, if you come from a food truck or the Riversdale Farmers Market, as you folks did, that's it takes a long time to get known. So thank goodness.
I think Debbie and Fernando were going to be known regardless.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they were very generous at the farmers market, I must say, when they first started. So they had a fan in me from the beginning.
That was no work on my part. They were already
no, they were
already well on their way.
Exactly. I'm going to take these questions in order. We have them in the chat box. The first one is, can you talk about Route 1 restaurants around here, please? I guess it's our Route 1.
Yeah, I would say for quite a while, it wasn't a great dining scene. And I have, I guess, probably half-formed opinions on why that is. I mean, college, when you're a college town and you're serving a college campus, I think sometimes you get a lot of chains that cater to that group, and college students typically don't have a lot of money to spend, so they tend to be cheap. So I think a lot of areas around College Park have traditionally been chains and sort of like more affordably priced chains. But the last 5 years has really been some terrific restaurants that opened up. And, I remember one, like I wrote about, gosh, it's maybe been 7 years now, Northwest Chinese food. It's this woman, she's from, but I forget which part of Northwest China, what province. It's sort of deceiving because to say it's Northwest, it's actually more Northeast if you look on a map, but it's sort of the way the geography of China is, they'll call it Northwest. But she was doing food from her home province, and it was really authentic. And, this is one of the things that I encounter in my job on a regular basis, is just the language barrier. Mm-hmm. And, she didn't speak English, and I, of course, don't speak any Mandarin. So we had a real difficult time. We kind of worked through it. And the hardest part was to convince her that I wasn't there to sell her an ad. I think sometimes when people hear that someone from the Washington Post is calling, they think I'm from the ad department and want to sell them something. And because they don't understand that, there's someone here that wants to write about you, and it'll cost you nothing, and we're going to come take pictures, and we're paying for everything. At some level, for some restaurateurs who may get taken advantage of by other outlets, they don't believe it. So it takes some convincing. And in this case, I had to go make a personal trip out there and show her my card and, try to find someone to help translate between us. But, Northwest Chinese food is a great example of some of the food that I think has popped up along Route 1. We've got cocineros now there. There's a family. They're one half's from Puebla and one half from Salvador, and they run some of the finest restaurants, I think, in the DC area. And they've opened up a Taqueria Habanero in College Park, and then opened up Cisneros, which is just Spanish for cook, which is sort of incorporating their philosophy. They believe that they're cooks. They're not these. They don't like the term chef because it has a sort of snobbishness and elevation to it that they don't want to be. They want everyone that cooks in their kitchen to have the sort of same status and not feel like one is above the other, and that everyone can contribute. And I really like that philosophy, and I think it creates a menu that is more egalitarian. A line cook can create a dish that eventually makes it onto the menu, and I think that is one way that the owners create a sustainable model where chefs move up, or not chefs, but cooks move up from, maybe going from a dishwasher to a line cook to a sous chef to chef de cuisine to maybe chef one day, and who knows where from there, going, opening their own restaurant. So all this is a long-winded way to say that Route 1 has become a much more interesting place to eat, and I would say in the last 5 years.
Well, and that Northwest restaurant, that is the spiciest place I think I've ever been. But I think in your original column, you warned us about that. So, but there was no way to tell her to tone it down because she didn't understand the language. But I'm glad they're successful.
And they have some dishes that are not as spicy, but there are some that are very spicy.
Very, yes. I still feel it. we have this, we love that you cover local restaurants. Do you stay in touch with any of the restaurant owners and staff that you write about?
Well, I mean, I would say like on a week to week basis, no. But every once in a while, I mean, I follow many of them on social media and follow what they're doing, but I don't stay in touch with like phone calls or text. Unless there's a question that I may have, like I know at times I've turned to Debbie and Fernando to talk about pupusas, just because there's a whole pupusa culture that I only half understand. And so I would turn to people that know things far better than I do to get their opinions. And that may have me circle back to people that I've talked to before. So, I mean, my phone is crammed with phone numbers and emails, and all of them are so generous with their time if I have something that I don't understand and want to know better.
I have a comment that I think probably speaks for us all. I would say that your covering our restaurants is really great and has given these restaurants a real push and gets us looking at many restaurants that are not high profile and high prices. Because as you say, obviously, if you wanted a pizza or a sandwich, this was the place to be. But now we are getting a little more sophisticated. So, here's a good question. Why is it so hard for me to find decent Chinese food in Prince George's County?
Well, I think it's a pretty simple answer. It's like, where do most of the Chinese and Chinese American immigrants live? And I don't think many live in Prince George's County, where you will find the best and most like intense number of restaurants, or highest density of Chinese restaurants is like Rockville. And there's a sizable Chinese community up in Rockville. And you'll find a good number of restaurants in like Northern Virginia, this Seven Corners area. And interestingly enough, I mean, like, think about where all the best Vietnamese restaurants are. They're all in Falls Church, right? And that's where a lot of the post-Vietnam refugees landed in Falls Church, and then sort of created out of nothing a community at Eden Center. But it's interesting because that shopping center, although it's been Vietnamese for a couple of decades now, plus it's kind of turning more, I think, broadly Asian and more Chinese. So I think some of the migration patterns around the DMV change, but I think right now the best Chinese you'll find is in Rockville.
Well, and didn't I read recently, it may not have been from you, but that dim sum place that was in Wheaton Plaza, I think they just closed.
Yeah, you're thinking of Hollywood East.
Hollywood East, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't close.
Oh, okay.
I hope not. But they've had a lot of real ups and downs, and I wrote a magazine story about Hollywood East and the Yu family, who's amazing family. See if I can find that story, and I'll drop it in here. I would encourage you to read their history, because they started Hollywood East 25 years ago.
Yeah.
In Wheaton, and they're still in Wheaton. Mm-hmm. But they've had a lot of ups and downs, and during the pandemic, Janet's husband, who she had been married to for like 44 years, he passed away from COVID early on. And as you can imagine, someone who's lived and worked together, she was just beside herself. She wasn't sure how to move on without her husband, Alan. So the story is a little bit about that, and just a little bit about their struggle, and really just a lot about an amazing family that has survived many ups and downs.
With wonderful dim sum, except try and get in there on a Sunday. We have another question that it asks, are there great vegetarian options at restaurants in our area?
There are. I always like to, I think like in the suburban Maryland, we are really fortunate to have some great South Indian restaurants. One of my favorites, unfortunately, just moved. It's Woodlands. I wrote sort of a pandemic era homage to Woodlands. It used to be over in kind of the Four Corners area of Tacoma Park, in that shopping center where there's now like a metro center. And they were there for a long, long time. And then they got, into a fight with their landlord, as these things tend to go. And he decided to leave and was originally just doing Woodlands out of the same kitchen where he does Jewel of India up in Silver Spring. And but he has now opened a beautiful, just gorgeous new restaurant in Gaithersburg. And it is mostly South Indian, and their buffet is just amazing. It's like, if you like South Indian, and it's a little spicy, so Marianne, be forewarned. But it's great. It's, and I think South Indian is one of the best vegetarian cuisines you can get. There's a place, oh gosh, what is the name of it? There's in Rockville. It's another Indian place. Let me see if I can find it. Oh yeah, Chettinadu. It's a rarely seen cuisine here in the DC area. I'll drop this review in. Really a wonderful. It's a South Indian restaurant, so it's got a fair number of vegetarian dishes, but it, unlike a lot of places, it does meat as well, and there's a history behind that, which I get into in the review.
Great. How much does your formal culinary training impact your reviews?
None. It was French based, and like a lot of culinary schools, they're unfortunately good or bad. It's not, whatever it is. They tend to be focused on French cuisine, because French cuisine was the first one to be codified. It had a lot of history. It had a lot of written recipes, so it was teachable. But I don't review French restaurants. It's like, it's not really what I do. But some of those techniques sometimes creep into other forms of cooking, but sometimes they don't. I mean, wok cooking is completely different from saute cooking. Cooking over a grill is far different than using a 1,000-gallon barrel smoker with an offset wood box. All these things take a lot of time and a lot of practice and a lot of expertise. And so, I would say I rarely think about what I was studied in when I'm reviewing.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of French restaurants. So Tom seems to love Et Voila in Foxhall. How did you make the decision not to remain anonymous? I mean, the owners, the staff. You didn't mind us seeing your face today, or was it a decision?
I've never been anonymous. I mean, I don't go out of my way to let people know that I'm coming. I will, I usually go to restaurants that don't have reservations, so I can just walk in. And most of the restaurants that I go to, they're not looking for a critic. They're just doing their thing. And so it's easy for me to dip in and dip out and never be noticed. I also just think it's impossible to be anonymous now. Like, I'm sorry, but all the critics who think they're anonymous, which is increasingly few at this point, they are not. Their pictures hang in the kitchen. Everyone knows what they look like. They're always looking out for them. So it's sort of a, I wouldn't call it a charade, but it's close.
Do you see any particular trends in Prince George's County? I suppose in terms of restaurants and or food direction?
It's an interesting question. I haven't really sat down to think about that. I mean, I guess I've really seen the rise of, for lack of a better word, like taqueria culture. Like there's a number of taquerias that have popped up. There's a, I think, is Camp Springs in Prince George's County?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a huge county. It's hard to remember all the boundaries of it. There's a great place down at Camp Springs called El Real Street Food, El Papi Street Food Tacos. And the guy has lived all over Mexico, and he does sort of specializes in birria. And he's got a birria like nobody else. He ages his birria. I mean, it's become kind of a trendy dish now during the pandemic. But he does a thing that I've never seen anyone else. And I probably shouldn't talk about it too much because it may be illegal. He may be doing something that if the county knew about it would, stop it because it's probably not hygienic. But he ages his birria, and it gets a little fermented, and it gives it a really terrific flavor. But that's one taqueria, and there's Tacos a la Madre, which I went to the other day, and really have enjoyed them. And of course, there's Taqueria Habanero. I just noticed more authentic Mexican style tacos in the area, and for an area that didn't have good Mexican tacos for a long time, it's really I just love seeing it. And places that make their own tortillas too, which has often not been the case.
Mm-hmm. Well, the salmon I defrosted for dinner is probably going to stay there because now I'm turned on for tacos. This is another comment, but I think we probably all would say the same thing, that I'm so grateful to have a local journalist reporting on our area. The Washington Post doesn't always recognize Prince George's positive things, so we thank you for what you do. Amen to that.
Thank you.
Is there somewhere closer than DC Sandwich that you would suggest for really good banh mi? Did I pronounce that correctly? B-A-N-M-I?
Yeah. Boy, that's okay. Forgive me for a second. I'm gonna do a little Google search.
Is that Thai? Banh mi?
It's Vietnamese.
Vietnamese.
So, I think the best banh mi is you're going to find is in Northern Virginia, because that's where the Vietnamese community is. I'm trying to see if there's some, there's a place, let's see. So there's a place I wrote about 4 years ago. It's not in Prince George's County, but it's a tiny little spot in DC called Bun DC, BUN DC, and they specialize in pho and noodle soups, but they have some good banh mi as well. See if there's anything closer. Well, there's a place in Silver Spring called Photon Vin. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's in sort of downtown Silver Spring on Colesville Road. And it's a really charming shop, let's say right around the corner between Fenton and Colesville. And they've got some good banh mi.
Okay, our next question is, are there any Indonesian restaurants in our area and beyond? I don't know how far beyond, but.
You know, I don't know of any. I think there was one at, if I remember correctly, there was one in Falls Church, but I don't really know if that's still around. I don't have any sort of bead on good Indonesian restaurants. Maybe you all know better.
We got a little bit of praise for some of what you've already talked about. Hollywood East. Evan Glass of Montgomery County Council is an avid fan, apparently, of Hollywood East and has done fundraisers there to try and keep them in business. So, and then Tim's article is wonderful. Somebody else loves Woodlands. Ethiopian.
Oh, we are blessed to have great Ethiopian.
Yeah.
Silver Spring is the place to go. Sorry, it's hard to remember all these places off the top of my head, so I've got to do a little quick search.
Do you like Shaga?
You know, I think it's good. It's really close to me. It's not the one I turn to, I would say, most often. There's my favorite is in Adams Morgan, which is Zenovich. That used to be on like U Street corridor, but now it's in Adams Morgan. There is a place in Silver Spring called Bete Ethiopian Cuisine. It's in a standalone house. I love that place, especially now because the weather is getting warmer and they've got this really nice backyard area with a tree you can literally sit under. Here's another one. There's a place called Demeliket, which is, there's that divide between Ethiopian and Eritrean. The cultures are very much similar, but if you're from Eritrea, you don't necessarily like to be called an Ethiopian. And there are some differences between the cuisine, but there's a really good Eritrean restaurant called Meliket, and that's in Silver Spring. That's worth checking out.
We got a recommendation too for very good vegetarian Indian at Amber Spice in Laurel.
Oh, that's a great call. Yeah, I've been there. I like that place.
Anybody in the area in the PG area doing good fermentation? And I think it's a combination question. I'll ask them all at once. Do you know about the wonderful Bira restaurant in Philadelphia that had a segment in the Chef's Table documentary series? And then we could do these one at a time. They're all from one person. Have you reviewed Lotus Cafe in Silver Spring?
I've never done a Lotus Cafe. I've eaten there a number of times and have liked it, but I've never done a review. So fermentation, fermentation covers a large swath of food preparation, from bread to pickles to burrito sauce. One thing that I learned about this group, maybe 10 years ago. They're called Number One Sons. They're often in farmers markets, and they do some amazing things. They do pickles, half sours, kimchi, sauerkraut, daikon, beets, Thai golden beets. I think you can find them. I'm trying to look up their site where they're at. But they're Number One Sons, and they're in Brandywine Farmers Market.
They've been around here, but I don't know how regularly. I
So
think
they're,
they're at the
yeah,
River Market, but
Washington's Green Grocer. At Supergirl, you can get their stuff at Supergirl, the soup and salad restaurant. So yeah, I highly recommend them if you haven't had Number One Sons products.
do you like to get recommendations from your readers?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. Some of the best recommendations have come from readers. There was a restaurant in Arlington. Well, I'm going to call it up so I can get it. So it was a place in Arlington called Charga Grill. And literally this reader emailed me and said, I know you cover a lot of these small restaurants, and I've been going to this place called Charga Grill in Arlington, and I think you would like it. And I just sort of tucked that away. And then one day I was struggling to find a good restaurant to go to, and I called that email, and I went, and I was just blown away. It's like these two, I think they're cousins, but they're from Pakistan, and they do Pakistani street food. But then they combine that with like doing street food from around the world, and it's amazing. I mean, they do like different styles of chicken. They'll do a Pakistani version called saji. They do a peri peri, a South African chicken, and then they'll do the sort of the Peruvian rotisserie chicken, and they're sort of obsessives about it. And I went the first time, and they were so incredibly nice there. It's like there was just one of those places where they just make you feel extremely welcome as soon as you walk in the front door. And I was like, it's my first visit here. What's your specialty? And before I knew it, they were giving me samples of everything. Like they were lining them up on the counter, and I was like, I'm not hungry now. But they were just so generous, and I found the owner is charming, and the head cook incredibly charismatic, and it was just one of those. It was a reader recommendation, and I never, I shouldn't say never. It probably would have taken me a long time to find it, so I was really grateful. And as soon as that review was published, I emailed the woman who sent me that recommendation. I said, I cannot thank you enough for this, and here's the link. And I swear to God, 10 seconds later, she responded back, and she was just so excited and crestfallen because now her favorite place was going to be overrun with people.
Would you like to one day have a column like Tom does in the weekend section based on an online chat, I guess? I guess that's the one where the reader's having some event, and what restaurant would he suggest?
Like Tom's weekly chat on Wednesday?
Yeah.
Or are you saying would I like to review the kind of restaurants Tom does in those
I don't know.
Sunday magazine?
Direct words. Would you one day have a column like the one Tom has in the weekend section? I think it's based on an online chat.
Yeah, that's Tom. That's a condensation of Tom's online chat on Wednesday, and there was a time there at the Post where it seemed like everyone had a chat. you know, and I think we realized that it's kind of not a good use of your time unless you've got a very large following. And Tom does have a large following, so it makes sense for him to have a chat. I mean, he'll get, thousands of people logging on to ask him questions and read his answers. I'm not sure it makes as much sense in my beat to do the same thing. Maybe there would be interest in such a chat, and we've talked about it in the past, but I think the Post editor's appetite for starting more chats is not what it used to be. So I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
I think you've answered this at least with 2 restaurants, but have you been to any restaurants in College Park? And Taco Habanero and the Northwest Chinese, certainly.
Yeah, and Tacos a la Madre. How many? There's been a number of restaurants in College Park I've written about over the years. We'll look and drop some links in. But yeah, we have talked about a few of them. Northwest Chinese. There used to be a place by the owner of Northwest Chinese called CB Chinese Grill. Unfortunately, that one closed. That was very sad. I really liked what they were doing. They were doing these sort of, for lack of a better word, called in America would call it Chinese burrito, but it's called chungbing. They're just kind of wraps, and they were delicious. But unfortunately, that did not survive the pandemic.
That was terrific, right near the 7-Eleven.
Yep.
Maybe they could add that to their Northwest restaurant, and I would go back because I love those wraps. Somebody else wants to know where to find the best falafel.
I still think my favorite is Max's. And I think Max's is closed down, haven't they, in Silver Spring?
Boulevard? Yeah.
I know for a while they still had the stand in Nats Park. Is that right? Did Max's close down? It's been a while since I've been to Max's. That was such a popular spot for a while. It looks like Max's Cafe is still open. It's in Silver Spring. I highly recommend them. And I know the owners of Amsterdam Falafel Shop. I like theirs. They had sort of grand plans for a while to become a big chain, and I think they've sort of reined in those plans. And one of the owners died during COVID, got COVID, and unfortunately died. But they were the first ones, I think, that kind of made a fast casual out of falafel, where you would go there and order falafel balls in either a bowl or in a pita, and then go to town. Put whatever you want in it and stuff it fat and have it burst at the seams. And that was a very popular thing, I would say, in the late 2000s. And they're still around. There's still a few around.
Silver Diner occasionally has some pretty decent falafel. That is from a very inexperienced pro, you understand. Now, this is going to take you back. Somebody used to read a listing of the economics professor from Northern Virginia reviewing every imaginable cuisine in our area. It was very popular. Do you know his name, and is he still doing this?
Tyler Cowen. Yeah. He was required reading for a long time for food writers in the area. He was, the last time I checked, and I have to admit it's been a while, but he was still out there. He is an economics professor, but he's really well traveled, and his was just about. I don't know if you go to his blog. It was called like the Tyler Cowen's Ethnic Eats guide or something. And he would just go everywhere in the city. And what he had going for him was that he often had eaten in the country where the dishes originated. So he had some perspective on it. He wouldn't really get into a lot of details about the restaurants. So it was mostly just like he was scouting places. Like he would just say, "Oh, I love this place. Reminds me of when I was in Lahore, Pakistan, back in 1993." And get this and get that. But he wouldn't give you a lot of like background information on who was behind it, why they were doing what they were doing, what their specialty was. So I always looked at Tyler's blog as like a great scout. Like he would find some really out of the way places that I would then try to go to and learn more about. But yeah, he was, and he probably still is doing it. Like I said, I haven't checked it in probably about a year, but the guy was ubiquitous for the longest time.
Now, what is your vote for the best pizza in our area?
Well, that's almost an impossible one to answer because it's like best Neapolitan pizza, best deep dish pizza, best New York style pizza. Like, if I had to pick like favorite Neapolitan style, which became huge in our market in like the mid 2000s when Two Amy's came up on board, I would say it's Inferno. It's this chef who used to work at the Oval Room, which was named because it was right near the White House. So he's like a fine dining chef, formally trained, but he's from Naples and got sick of being a fine dining chef and decided that he was going to devote his life to pizza. And boy, did he. Like, he is just one of these chefs who, once he's committed to this one dish, he just obsesses about it. Like, he makes dough that's fermented on the counter, not refrigerated, for 48 hours. He gets the best ingredients. He figures out, the right ratio of doughs. He doesn't use like just 00 flour. He will use 00 combined with, another like higher protein flour imported from Italy. And I mean, he's just my kind of guy to talk to because he would just obsess about his one thing, which is pizza dough. And I think he's amazing at it. His pizza dough is just, you can eat it as bread all by itself.
Do you have any restaurant related pet peeves?
Not really a pet peeve. I just, the restaurant industry has gone through so much upheaval in the last 2 years. And I think they've got a lot of empathy and sympathy from the dining public. So, I'm not about to like talk about pet peeves. I think they've got enough troubles right now just surviving. So I'll just leave it at that.
Do you have any suggestions for restaurants where one can get low carb food? Who would want it? No.
Well, I guess Texas 250. Meats and more meats. That's about as low carb as you can get.
This may have been what you were referring to. Somebody said, what about the Amsterdam falafel shop in Adams Morgan? Been there for ages.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. The earlier with the ones that were trying to expand and franchise themselves. One of the co-founders died during COVID. Really, really upsetting the community. He was very popular, and but they're still around, and I really like them. And they're the ones that sort of created the fast casual model of Middle Eastern falafel food, where you create your own dish based on what you like to put on top of your falafel, and it's become huge.
This is the positive aspect of COVID on the number of food trucks that have been coming into neighborhoods like swimming pool parking lots, empty and off season, etc. Now that restaurant dining is coming back, what's the impact on these food trucks?
I've wondered that myself, and I haven't really looked into it. It's interesting because I'll just use the Post as an example. Like, we are located, right across from Franklin Park, and prior to COVID, there would be food trucks lined up along 13th Street, and they would be there every weekday, and it would be a really good option for those that were looking for something different to eat, other than like a downtown sandwich shop. But they're gone. And those parking spots are gone too. The city has converted them to like a bus lane. So, and during COVID, a lot of them, they found a new market in the suburbs because people were no longer working downtown. So they took their business to where the people were, which were neighborhoods, which was just a brilliant business decision. Like Little Minor Taco, another Route 1 corridor that I've written about. They took their food trucks. They started out as a food truck, and they took them out to the suburbs. And, not just like the immediate suburbs around DC, they were going all the way to Manassas. And they were going to Baltimore, which I'm sure wouldn't be appreciated being called a suburb. But they would go all the way up to Baltimore to feed people. And that became really lucrative for the owners of Little Minor. And it allowed them to expand very rapidly during COVID. One of the few, I would say, business successes during COVID, because they had the foresight to reroute their trucks to where the people really wanted them, and they were hugely popular. But now that people are returning to downtown, although I would say it's still nowhere near what it used to be. Downtown still feels pretty ghostly. I'll be curious to see if those trucks sort of split the difference, because a lot of people are still working from home. A lot of companies have made the decision to continue to let people work from home. Right now the Post is, we split the difference. We are required to come in 3 days a week, but 2 days a week we work from home. So, I don't think we're alone. I hear other companies that have sort of split schedules like that too. And so how that will impact food trucks, I suspect they're still kind of figuring out what their model will be moving forward. Will they try to keep some routes to where it makes sense in the suburbs, where people are still there, where they can still make money? Sure. But will they try to come back down? I really hope so, because right now the options downtown DC are really limited.
Remember the lobster food truck that was so popular? People would wait an hour and a half in line for them.
Yeah, the lobster pound truck. Yeah,
the lobster pound. Yeah.
Yeah, they shut down a couple of years back, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately. What is the most memorable meal you've had over the last 12 months or so?
Okay, well, you tailored that question well enough. People always want to know what my favorite restaurant is, which I can never answer, but this one is more specific. So, I wrote about this chicken and waffles place, and chicken and waffles is an old dish, and it's got a really interesting history. But there was this place that I drove by, and it was just one that I drove by, didn't know anything about it. It's called Uncle C's, and it's in sort of the unincorporated part of Alexandria. It's called Uncle C's Chicken and Waffles, and it looks like a chain waiting to happen. Very official looking logo, neon sign, very professional. And I started to go eat there, and then I found out the owners were Afghan Americans. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then I started researching it. And there is a whole history about Afghan Americans running fried chicken shacks. And it dates back to, like, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And the original thought was that, the Afghan refugees came to the United States, that they were just following Iranians who came here during the revolution. And, KFCs opened up during the era of the Shah, when there was much more American investment in Iran. But then when the revolution came, they fled and came to the United States and opened chicken shacks and shops here in the United States. There was a belief that maybe the Afghans just followed Iranians into that business. But it turns out that there was, like, a guy who started doing Afghan chicken restaurants in New York. And he would hire almost exclusively Afghan Americans to run his place. And then they slowly started leaving and starting their own. So there was like a whole community of Afghan-run fried chicken shops in New York. And one of the owners of Uncle C's, his dad used to run one up in New York. And so he comes from this long tradition. And, the food was good, but the story was even better. And that's the kind of stuff that I just love learning about. It's like, it's not just the food on the plate. It's the long history. It's the history of war. It's the history of immigration. It's the history of refugees. And a history of, like, finding their way in a new country where a lot of things are foreign. And restaurants often provide that route for a lot of people that can come over to the United States. And this was just one more example of it.
I have my eye on the clock. It's about 3:15. You good for a couple more minutes?
Sure.
Okay. What's your favorite, what restaurants I will ask it as it's written. What are your favorite restaurants that you and your wife don't tire of going to?
So what do we like? Comfort foods, I guess this would fall under, right? Like,
Or romantic dining, I don't know.
Yeah, like when I don't feel like eating out professionally, and by professional I mean having to pick something that maybe I wouldn't eat that day normally. We love Indian food. I think that's our first choice. And we really like Jewel of India up in Silver Spring. And frankly, I was crushed when Woodlands moved to Gaithersburg, because it's no longer convenient. Like during the pandemic, when I didn't want to go out, I was tired, I was stressed. At one point during the pandemic, I was working on this long investigation for months and months, and it was really stressful. The company that I was looking into, they had hired a crisis PR person, and he was being very aggressive and doing his best to make me uncomfortable. And he was very successful at it. So there were times that I was just wanting Woodlands, and I think maybe 3 days in a row I had Woodlands when it was still nearby. And I just loved it. There were a couple of dishes. They do these rice dishes that I love. And rice doesn't sound like it's a meal, but the way Woodlands prepares them, they are a meal. And I would just order them and get some naan and some raita, and that would be my comfort meal. And I'm torn up that they're now like 20 miles away, and I just can't go get it quickly.
Uber will bring it to you.
But it won't be warm.
No, of course not. A question what about restaurants in Mount Pleasant?
Oh, there's a wonderful place called Purple Patch, a Filipino restaurant, which is like a class of restaurants that have really, I think, found their foothold in DC area in the last 10 years, really around the country in the last 10 years. And they do some really great stuff. Like if you've not been to Purple Patch, I think the owners there have found really delightful ways to make Filipino food approachable to Americans, especially during the pandemic. They were doing some really fascinating things, including like ube waffles. And ube is this like purple potato, yam, sweet potato from that's used a lot in Filipino cooking. And they would use the flour to make a batter for waffles. And they were the most purple waffles you'd ever seen in your life. And they were gorgeous and really tasty.
And low carb, of course. Do you have anything to say about Corned Beef King? It's both a food truck and a brick and mortar restaurant in Rockville.
You know, I've only been once, and because it used to be outside the dive bar up there in Rockville that burned down. What's the name of it?
Rockville that burned.
Oh, I'm blanking on its name. Anyway, it used to sit out there, and I would get it, and it's good. I mean, I think it's quite good. I haven't been there. Yeah, Hank Deedles. Thank you. I see that. Thank you, Gloria. Hank Deedles is just an amazing dive. Just like a freestanding house where everyone was rude and they just served like cheap beer, and you could just sit down and be grumpy all night if you wanted to. But they had some deal with the corned beef truck that would be outside, and you could get a corned beef sandwich, and it was. I really enjoyed it, and I forget where they've opened a brick and mortar.
Yeah, it said they just moved. I don't know.
Okay, they're moved to a gas station in Rockville. Okay,
Rockville, yeah.
Okay, good to know.
Now, of course, if we want carbs, somebody's recommending Shortcake Bakery in Hyattsville. Have you been there?
It's been a while, but yeah, I've been there. It's
That's an interesting
cute,
story.
yeah, cute little place.
Yeah, and interesting about her. Somebody is.
I don't know her story. What's her story?
Well, I think she's just a small business, and Lisa, you may know. I think she got support from the Small Business Administration and stuff, but she was a one-man band for a long time. She may still be.
She's been cooking. She started cooking with her grandmother and her mother in Boston, and remembers baking a lot as a child. But she has a very distinguished history. I mean, she worked for the county council for a while. She's been involved in politics. She worked for Peter Shapiro, who was on the county council. You know, she's had, I think she's had a range of careers, and Carter may know more about her, but yeah, she was great. And the food, I mean, the food's fantastic. Carter.
I'll put a link to the quarter conversation that Cheryl did in the chat window.
Yeah.
And I'll give a shout out to the recipe that you'll get there. That Nantucket pie, cranberry pie, is so easy to make, and it's just delicious. So,
I made it too for Thanksgiving. It was a great idea.
It is. It's so easy. Have you tried any of the Korean restaurants in Beltsville?
I have tried some of them, and there's some really good ones. Let me see. There's not that many Korean barbecue that I know about in Beltsville. I think most of those are in Annandale, but let's see. Yeah, so there's a place called Darewan in Beltsville. you may know about it, but it's been a while since I've been there. But they make their own noodles, and they do this sort of Korean comfort food called jjajangmyeon. Forgive me if I'm butchering the pronunciation of that, but it's like this black bean sauce that's on these house-made noodles, and you can hear the chef, making the noodles, in the kitchen, because they, it's one of those doughs that they have to slap, so they're literally like, shaping it like that and then swapping it on the counter, and you can hear during the period when the chef's making the noodles, the swacking on the counter. But the noodle dishes there are terrific.
The second question from the same person is, what drew you to Hyattsville?
Affordable housing.
Yeah. In the old days. Now it's not so affordable anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we just bought like 5 years ago, and it's insane how much the prices have gone up since then.
Corned Beef King was apparently at the gas station in Rockville on the Pike, and now it's moved up to the Rockville Metro.
Hopefully to go back to Hank Deedles. I like that combination there. I think Hank's has opened back up after coming, they had to do a lot of repairs from that fire.
Purple Patch is fabulous, but looking for other recommendations in Mount Pleasant. And could you say or spell the name of the Ethiopian House restaurant in Silver Spring, please?
So it's Bete, Bete. I think, did I drop the list of best Ethiopian in the chat? Yeah, it's a little old, but I did and some of these have closed down, unfortunately, but I'll send a list of some of my favorite Ethiopian restaurants. Some of them are still around. Fortunately, pandemic has had an effect on some of them.
How often do you visit a restaurant you're reviewing? And then you need someone to go with you when you review restaurants. We can all volunteer for that.
Restaurant reviewing during COVID has been difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I have enjoyed for many years eating out with people, but during COVID, and I got COVID pre-vaccination, so it was not pleasant. But fortunately, I didn't have to go to the hospital. But that really made me even more cautious than I was, and I was very cautious even before I got COVID. So I didn't do a lot of eating in restaurants for the last 2 years. Fortunately, my style of restaurant, I can order out, and what I did is I bought a little tray table for my steering wheel in my car, and I will literally eat in my car so that the food is still warm and fresh and hot, because it's not fair to the restaurant if you don't, if you have to travel even 10, 15 minutes, it changes the texture, the flavors of the food. So I literally sometimes I'll bring a friend or my wife, and we'll just eat right there in the car. And I can't tell you how many meals I've eaten in the car in the last 2 years. But that's starting to change, fortunately, for me and my car. But to answer the question, I go at least 3 times, but I cannot remember the last time I went to just 3 times. I'm very fortunate that I work for the Washington Post. They will let me go as many times as I want, and I will go as many times as I feel like I need to go to understand what the restaurant and the chef is doing. And sometimes it's easier than others. And sometimes I miss an important dish or two and requires me to go back and try it. But, and sometimes I will eat a dish that maybe I didn't like the first time and think maybe it was just not a good day, and I go back again and try it. So I would say I go at least 5 times to a restaurant before I write about it. It's only fair. And I'm in a position, and I work for a paper and for an owner who's got, well, more money than God. So I don't have to worry about it. It's like they cover my expenses. So if I'm going to do this job and do it right, I take advantage of it.
Well, I think this is a good way to wrap it up. Pete, but lots of thank yous and how much people enjoyed it. But like we all want to know how you can eat out so much and not gain weight. But as you said earlier, we are only seeing the top half of you.
I don't drink anymore. That's one way not to gain weight.
Not so much fun, though.
Depends on definition of fun.
Yeah. Actually, there is a question. A longtime Post journalist told somebody recently to expect the Post to be all digital, no papers delivered within 2 to 3 weeks. Will that affect your work?
I have not got that memo. I would be very surprised at that because there are still many subscribers who rely on the paper. It may not be the millennials and the Gen Zs, but there are just hundreds of thousands of people that still like to read the paper. So I'm not sure my journalism crap detector goes into the red on that one. But I've been wrong before. I could be wrong now, but I have a hard time believing that.
She justified it by saying she meant years, not weeks. But still, 2 or 3 years.
Oh, okay, yeah.
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 Well, anything you need to do to help us support the Post coming to our door, I'm happy to go out and campaign for. It's really terrific. Well, this has been terrific, Tim. There are lots and lots of thank yous in here. It just really was very enlightening, and we're so grateful for your time. And keep the articles coming; they're fascinating.
Thank you. Thanks for all the great questions. This has been really entertaining for me.
Well, it's really fun for us. So we will try all your restaurants, and if the 250 people are still here, keep the doors open. We're on our way.
I don't think there's any worry about that.
Yeah, except when you go by mistake on a Monday or a Tuesday. What a disappointment, because they're closed on Monday and Tuesday. So,
Carter, can I ask Carter a question? Do all of the links go into the recordings, or do we need to download the chat on our own?
Yeah, it would. If you want to have them right away, go ahead and download the chat. I will try to make sure I put all of them together on the webpage when we have the video posted, which will be early in the week.
Thank you, and thank you, Tim.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, before we close, I just want to mention to everybody our next Carter conversation is May 21st, and it's entitled Hunt, Gather, and Make. And Raquel Keller, who's local, will lead a virtual hands-on art making session with everyday items you found around your house. So that'll be hands-on. In the meantime, we've got a month to eat. So thank you all for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and we look forward to seeing you in May.